Okay, start with this. Just picture it. Massive protests. We're talking over 2,500 locations.
Yep.
All across the globe. And the streets aren't just full, they're overflowing. Millions chanting, and listen to this chant: no kings, no crowns, no thrones. This isn't, just some random political frustration. It feels different. This is organized, it's widespread. It's like domestic defiance really hitting the pavement, and it's happening right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And that profound domestic political unrest, it really shows this deep lack of faith in, well, centralized authority, and it's colliding like head on with these catastrophic economic collapse indicators. It's a perfect storm almost.
Exactly. While the streets are practically burning with political anger, you've got the U.S. government shutdown.
The fourth time in less than 6 years. Can you believe it? It paralyzes everything essential.
Regulatory bodies, security agencies.
This madness, and inflation is spiking, and then there's the big one, the undeniable marker, really terrifying.
Gold.
Gold! Shattering all records, hitting an unbelievable $4,300 an ounce. It screams lost confidence, doesn't it?
Totally. But what's truly fascinating here, and this is really the core paradox of the material we're looking at from Michael Oliver, it's how the two big North American neighbors are reacting so differently.
Right. While Washington is just, well, reeling from this domestic chaos, these tariff wars, a government that can't even stay open, just across the border up north, Canada is quietly, strategically rewriting the rules of the game.
Yeah, turning restraint, predictability even, into a kind of diplomatic weapon.
And that patience, that calm, it seems to be forcing the U.S. toward compromise. It's quite the strategy.
It really is. So we're going to spend this time taking apart the detailed analysis from Mr. Michael Oliver's latest video.
Yeah, he really lays out how this whole America First experiment, based on protectionism, isolation, is starting to unravel from the inside out. Yeah. Stretched thin by its own political instability, these self-inflicted tariff wounds. And Oliver analyzes exactly how Canada's response, this calculated, calm response, isn't just surviving the pressure. It's actually strategically exploiting that U.S. instability to gain, well, immense long-term leverage.
Okay, so what's our mission here? What are we trying to figure out? We need to break down these specific signals Oliver identified, both economic and political. We need to understand why investors are fleeing the dollar for gold so fiercely. It's dramatic.
It is. And the truth about how these tariffs are basically working as this hidden tax on U.S. consumers, on U.S. industry.
Yeah, that's crucial. And the single strategic move Canada made that just laid bare how deeply integrated the whole North American economy really is. Inseparable almost.
Exactly. It's a story about power, yes, but also about patience and interdependence.
Okay, let's unpack this. But hey, before we really get into the weeds, especially on how Prime Minister Carney played this kind of trade chess, just a quick reminder why you tune in. You want the real intelligence, right? Not just the noise, the headlines. So make sure you don't miss any of our future analysis, our synthesis. Head over and subscribe to The Deep Dive. Find it on Credvia. Right now, we deliver this kind of knowledge straight to you.
Okay, so Oliver's analysis kicks off quite logically with the political foundation. He highlights the sheer scale of this domestic strain in the U.S. He calls this rising wave of discontent the No Kings movement.
No kings. That's powerful imagery.
It is. And again, we're talking over 2,500 coordinated demonstrations. Major global cities, yes, but really focused inside the U.S. Capitol's financial centers.
Right.
And this movement, it's not just, typical partisan stuff. Oliver argues it's driven by this really profound defiance against what the demonstrators see as, quote, authoritarian rule and massive abuses of presidential power. That's the core feeling.
And who's involved? Is it just one group?
No, that's what's interesting. Oliver's team noted it's surprisingly diverse. You've got, urban progressives who feel let down by the system, but also disaffected libertarians worried about state overreach. Even parts of the farming community fed up with the chaos from the trade war.
Wow, quite a coalition. Right. And what are they actually demanding?
Well, the demands are structurally significant. Things like major wealth taxation, putting severe limits on the Federal Reserve's independence, and breaking up big corporate monopolies they think have basically captured the state. It's deep anti-establishment anger.
And this political fury, it's happening alongside actual government breakdown, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's mirrored by the functional paralysis of the state. The U.S. is now in its fourth government shutdown in under 6 years.
We just have to pause on that. Fourth shutdown. We can't treat this as normal, right?
We really shouldn't. Think about the economic impact. Key agencies just crippled. The SEC, meant to be watching the financial markets, skeleton crews. The FDA, Food and Drug Safety, massive delays on approvals.
And the human cost. Federal workers furloughed, families unsure about rent.
Exactly. All because of these congressional battles, mostly over healthcare cuts and these really aggressive immigration policy demands. It creates so much uncertainty.
So Oliver connects these dots, the protests and the paralysis.
Yes, his synthesis is that these two things reflect this growing realization, globally even, that the America First policy is fundamentally fracturing the nation's stability. This weaponizing of tariffs plus the aggressive control over institutions. It signals to the world that the U.S. political system just isn't reliable anymore.
And stability. That used to be America's calling card, its biggest asset almost.
Precisely. Oliver stresses that stability was the cornerstone of the dollar's global reserve status. Now, it's become a source of profound systemic risk.
Okay, let's shift to the economic symptoms Oliver flagged, because this is where the political mess turns into, like, actual financial panic.
Right. So the IMF estimates U.S. growth at, well, a pretty shaky 2% for 2025. Modest at best.
But 2% growth doesn't sound terrible on its own.
It doesn't, but context is everything. That modest figure is kind of meaningless when you look at the deficit. The national deficit has just ballooned. It's at an alarming 6.5% of GDP.
6.5%. Put that into perspective for us. How bad is that?
Historically, it's really bad, outside of, say, a major war or a massive depression. That level of sustained deficit spending, it signals profound fiscal unsustainability. It inevitably leads to serious worries about sovereign debt and eventually downgrades to credit ratings.
Which scares the global investment community.
Massively. And that brings us back to the gold indicator, the $4,300 an ounce figure Oliver focused on. That's the market just screaming its response to all this fiscal and political instability.
So gold hitting that record price isn't just a number.
Not at all. Gold is the ultimate hedge against fiat currency, against government instability. This price action is the market yelling that it's lost faith. Lost faith in the U.S. dollar's long-term buying power, and crucially, lost faith in U.S. government debt treasury bonds as the world's safest asset. That's huge.
Investors are actively fleeing the dollar, as Oliver put it. Where are they going?
Well, his analysis suggests capital is pouring into physical gold ETFs, obviously, but also into stable foreign government debt. Think Canadian bonds, German bonds, and even select emerging market currencies tied to commodities, ones that look fiscally sound.
And what does that flight mean for the U.S.?
It means the U.S. has to pay much higher interest rates to find buyers for its debt, which makes that 6.5% deficit even harder to manage.
A vicious cycle.
Exactly. Political anger, economic anxiety, feeding this dangerous loop that could become cyclical. It's worrying.
And it's not just foreign investors feeling this way. Oliver mentioned Wall Street, too.
Yeah, the sentiment shift is palpable even domestically. That initial optimism about protectionism, the whole winning trade wars idea, it's curdled into extreme caution. You've got business groups like the National Association of Manufacturers, even state farming bureaus groups that supported aggressive tariffs initially.
Right, I remember that.
Now they're issuing dire warnings. They're saying the tariffs are driving up their input prices, choking trade volumes, collapsing export markets.
So the farmers and producers who were promised better deals...
They're getting hammered. The promise boom just never showed up. Only the bill did.
Okay, let's shift gears dramatically now, across the border. Canada's unconventional counter-strategy. And this whole confrontation really crystallized around the Stellantis shockwave, didn't it?
It really did. That was the big, visible, symbolic win for the U.S. that the Trump administration was really trumpeting. The decision by Stellantis, the auto giant, to immediately shift its Jeep Compass production line.
Right, from Brampton, Ontario.
Erasing nearly 3,000 direct, high-paying Canadian jobs. Gone.
And moving it to Illinois, creating about 5,000 U.S. jobs. Politically, that looked like a win for the U.S.
It looked like one. But Oliver's video gives that critical, deeper analysis. He argues this wasn't really an economic victory. It was more like a forced dislocation. Meaning, the move wasn't driven by pure opportunity, like cheaper labor or better economics. It was overwhelmingly driven by punitive pressure. Specifically, those 25% tariffs on most finished Canadian goods heading to the U.S., and then the 10% tariffs slapped on Canadian energy exports.
Ouch.
These duties were explicitly designed to make operating in Canada just too expensive, essentially forcing the breakup of this highly integrated North American auto industry that took decades to build.
And the reaction in Brampton must have been intense.
Oh, immediate and raw. The mayor called it a punch to the gut, and the fear went way beyond just those 3,000 direct jobs.
Sure, the ripple effect.
Exactly. Local unions worried about thousands of indirect jobs, parts suppliers, logistics, local shops, and crucially, they questioned the huge amount of public money federal and provincial invested in retooling that very plant back in 2022.
On hundreds of millions, wasn't it? Taxpayer money.
Yeah. Intended to secure the plant's future. So the move felt like a betrayal, a direct assault on the region's economic security.
So faced with that, the obvious move is retaliation, right? Hit back with tariffs.
That was the temptation. Provincial leaders, opposition parties, they were demanding it loudly. Yet Prime Minister Carney's government chose this really unconventional path. Michael Oliver highlighted it as a masterstroke of diplomacy.
What did they do?
Instead of escalating immediately with retaliatory tariffs on U.S. goods, Ottawa quietly, unilaterally, just dropped dozens of existing counter duties on specific U.S. goods, even some Chinese goods, including key inputs like steel and aluminum.
Wait, even while the U.S. was still taxing Canadian steel and aluminum?
Exactly. They dropped their own counter tariffs on those inputs.
That seems counterintuitive. Why?
They were playing the long game, calculating, prioritizing structural survival over short-term political points. The official line from Canadian officials, escalation would be economically self-destructive in that climate.
So the goal was just stabilization.
Stabilization, yes. Preserving essential access to U.S. supply chains, limiting the damage to their own input manufacturers, and, crucially, preparing for the really critical USMCA review scheduled for 2026. That was key.
The USMCA review. Remind us why that 2026 date is so important.
Okay, so the trade agreement, USMCA, has what's called a sunset clause. Basically, the deal expires after 16 years, that's 2034. Unless the three countries review it every 6 years and agree to keep it going, 2026 is the first big checkpoint.
So if one country isn't happy in 2026,
the whole thing could start to unravel. It covers trillions in trade. So Canada's strategy was designed to keep the moral high ground, maintain stability going into that review. They wanted to ensure they wouldn't be blamed for torpedoing the regional economy. Smart, long-term thinking.
And this ties into that phrase Oliver highlighted. There's a time to hit back and a time to talk.
Precisely. That wasn't just a soundbite. It was a deeply calculated diplomatic move. By refusing to play the trade war game on U.S. terms, Canada turned patience into, well, immense power.
Positioning themselves as the steady hand.
Exactly. The predictable, reliable partner in North America, especially when you contrast it with the chaos coming out of Washington, the shutdowns.
And this quiet strategy is getting noticed elsewhere.
Oh, yeah. Oliver reports European and Asian trade officials are watching closely. They see Canada as maybe a model for how smaller economies can handle pressure from giants without getting into costly, self-defeating fights.
Interesting. A different kind of power play.
Definitely. And look, if you're finding this level of detailed breakdown useful, how we synthesize these complex strategies into something you can actually use, then you get why people trust us. Let me just jump in quickly. If you appreciate this kind of critical analysis, this synthesis, you really need to subscribe to the deep dive. We get this quality intelligence straight to you, keep you ahead of the curve. Find us, subscribe today. It's via Credvia. Don't miss out.
Okay, Section 3. This gets into what Oliver calls the central, almost delicious irony of the whole situation. The tariffs were meant to isolate Canada, weaken it, bring manufacturing back to the U.S.
That was the plan, yeah.
But Oliver points out they ended up severely disrupting U.S. automakers instead, inflating their costs.
And ironically, increasing their reliance on certain Canadian supply lines, the exact opposite of what was intended.
So the tariffs designed to make Canada bend actually forced an opening for more cooperation.
In a way, yes. Or at least force the U.S. to recognize the practical realities. Let's look at Stellantis again down at the micro level. They moved production to Illinois. Big political win for Washington.
Looked like it.
But that shiny new Illinois plant still needs specialized Canadian steel and aluminum inputs, essential stuff for building cars.
And this is where Canada dropping its own tariffs comes in.
Exactly. This is where Ottawa's non-retaliation pays off big time. Those critical Canadian materials are now flowing south, tariff-free from the Canadian side. Because Canada unilaterally dropped its counter duties, the U.S. tariffs intended to weaken Canada, they ultimately forced Washington to negotiate more balanced, practical terms.
Why? Because they just couldn't cut themselves off.
Pretty much. Washington learned quickly, apparently, that it can't isolate itself without massively hiking prices for its own consumers and crippling its own manufacturing base. Interdependence is real.
And this reshoring push, fueled by tariffs, it didn't create efficiency.
No, Oliver argues it created massive logistical strain instead, crippling bottlenecks. He cited a pretty sobering S&P Global report from October 2025. It confirmed vehicle assembly costs in the U.S. Midwest, the supposed heart of the manufacturing comeback, were up nearly 14% year over year.
14%. Why so high?
Two main reasons, according to the report. High input prices because of the tariffs themselves and these catastrophic transport delays. Delays caused by trying to reroute complex supply chains away from the established super efficient routes like the I-94 corridor linking Ontario and Michigan. You can't just rewire that overnight.
And this pain, it wasn't just autos, right? Oliver said it was broader.
Oh yeah, it acted like this hidden regressive tax across the whole U.S. economy. Oliver detailed that broader consumer pain, like construction firms down in Texas and Florida reporting dramatically higher material prices by late summer 2025.
Why them?
Because they rely heavily on specialized Canadian lumber and steel products, stuff they couldn't easily get elsewhere, or it cost way more. And furniture makers in North Carolina, warning of mass job cuts because the imported wood components, specific metals they need, just became too expensive due to overlapping duties.
So the supposed win for U.S. industry was actually squeezing U.S. consumers and other businesses.
Precisely. Driving up costs for basically everyone.
Which brings us to the core of Oliver's argument here. Canada's enduring leverage, what he called the quiet power of integration.
Yeah, the physical integration. We just have to remember the sheer scale of this relationship. Canada isn't just the U.S.'s second largest trading partner. That's big, but critically, it's the single largest foreign investor in the U.S.
Wow, largest investor.
Single largest. We're talking $500 billion invested in the U.S. economy over just the last 5 years.
$500 billion.
Supports tens of thousands of U.S. jobs. And Oliver's projection. If trade tensions ease, that figure could potentially hit $8 trillion in the next 5 years.
$8 trillion. That's staggering.
It gives Ottawa immense, durable leverage tied directly to U.S. congressional districts through those investments and jobs.
And the reliance goes beyond money into actual physical needs.
Absolutely. Highly sector-specific, fundamentally critical stuff for American stability. Canadian energy, for example, often taken for granted. But Ontario supplies crucial power peak and off-peak electricity to densely populated states like New York, Michigan, Minnesota. Keeps the lights on.
Right, and materials.
Quebec aluminum, specialized Ontario steel, they're critical inputs for U.S. aviation, defense, auto assembly. Oliver's data showed over 60% of components in U.S. auto assembly still come from Canada.
So the two nations are just physically tangled together.
Economically inseparable, essentially.
And Oliver pointed out a clever move by Carney's government to sort of remind the U.S. states of this.
Yeah, a brilliant strategic shift, according to Oliver. Done quietly, without shouting about tariffs, they started shifting incentive structures within Canada, like offering cheaper, subsidized off-peak electricity specifically to domestic Canadian manufacturers.
Manufacturers who might have been thinking of moving south because of U.S. pressure.
Exactly. It was this subtle, non-confrontational way of showing U.S. officials, state governors especially, that their economic stability, their lights, their heating, factory efficiency relies heavily on cooperation, not confrontation.
So geography and decades of integration meant Canada actually held a lot of cards.
That's Oliver's point. Despite the initial U.S. tariff onslaught, Canada held most of the real leverage because of that deep interdependence. Quiet power. Okay, so this functional failure of U.S. protectionism, it leads us to Oliver's final big observation, which is that U.S. policy, combined with the political instability, is causing key global partners to basically hit the brakes on massive promised investments.
Which partners specifically?
He focused on South Korea and the European Union, and their hesitation just throws Canada's stability into sharper relief. The U.S. has created this profound trust deficit.
Let's start with South Korea. What was the deal there?
Huge potential deal. South Korea promised a massive $350 billion investment, mostly in U.S. high-tech manufacturing sectors.
$350 billion.
Yeah.
Wow. In exchange for what?
In exchange for a relatively mild cap on U.S. tariffs against them at 15%. It was hailed initially as this major geopolitical win, securing a vital Asian ally.
But it stalled.
It stalled. Oliver warned right away about a serious lack of financial guarantees from the U.S. side. And then came this truly shocking event, the raid in Georgia, early September 2025, that really destabilized things.
A raid? What happened?
This incident, Oliver explained, really exposed the fragility of the U.S. commitment to, well, the rule of law. Over 300 highly skilled South Korean engineers and technicians, key people involved in managing this huge planned investment, were detained.
Detained? On what grounds?
dubious immigration grounds, apparently, and then they were summarily sent home on a special charter flight without a single one ever being formally charged with a crime.
Sent home without charges. That's
Oh,
incredible.
he was humiliating, terrifying for the executives back in Seoul.
So Korean leadership saw this as a warning sign.
Unmistakable evidence, according to Oliver. Evidence that the U.S. just isn't a reliable partner for these huge, long-term, multi-generational projects. You can't plan a decade-long semiconductor plant build if your key people can just be expelled on a whim, right?
Makes sense.
The Korean president even went public, warning that transferring that much capital, the $350 billion, without solid currency swap agreements, without legal guarantees, it could destabilize their entire economy, potentially trigger a financial crisis like they had in the late 90s.
So Oliver's conclusion on that deal.
Unless the U.S. somehow restores institutional trust, provides concrete financial guarantees, that $350 billion, it's not flowing, period.
Okay, what about Europe? Similar story.
Similar, but maybe more about aspirational promises versus reality. The EU-US deal was also celebrated with lots of fanfare back in September. Tariffs capped at 15%, like the Korea deal. And this announcement of $600 billion in European investment by 2029.
$600 billion.
Even bigger, huge number. But Oliver stressed, very bluntly, that this figure is fundamentally aspirational.
Meaning it's not real money yet.
Exactly. The European Union as an entity can sign agreements, sure, but the actual capital, that has to come from individual European governments, private companies, and many of those governments and companies are deeply struggling with their own economic problems right now.
Right. So who's actually supposed to contribute this $600 billion?
That's the problem. Oliver points out that nobody in Brussels has explained who will contribute, when the money will actually be released, or how it gets distributed. And public skepticism in Europe is really high. Why should, say, Germany facing its own export slowdown, or France dealing with labor strife and high energy costs?
Why should they send hundreds of billions abroad?
Right. When their own economies desperately need investment, stimulus, infrastructure spending. It looks great on paper, that $600 billion, but in practice, completely uncertain. And that uncertainty slows down real foreign direct investment.
So all this global hesitation.
Yeah.
How does Canada look by comparison?
That's the contrast Oliver draws. Canada's fiscal position is stable, partly because of its careful, non-confrontational response. It still has that coveted AAA credit rating, its debt-to-GDP ratio, currently the lowest in the G7.
And they're focused internally.
Yeah, Ottawa's focused on predictable, long and intentionally avoiding volatile trade fights.
So Oliver's final take on global investment flows.
It's sharp. It's a warning to Washington, really. He says Canada is now actively positioning itself as the safer, more stable, more predictable place for long-term capital in North America, precisely because U.S. policies are generating so much systemic uncertainty.
And the overall verdict on the tariff policy.
That it's comprehensively backfired, domestically and globally. Tariffs, Oliver says, can definitely create aggressive headlines. They get attention.
Yeah.
But they fundamentally cannot create trust. And without trust, those hundreds of billions in promised necessary capital, they just won't arrive. #tag outro.
Wow. Okay, so this really exhaustive analysis of the trade standoff, drawing straight from Michael Oliver's latest observations. It leaves us with a pretty clear and powerful lesson, doesn't it?
I think so. This whole test of strength, it proved that power in global trade, especially within a tightly integrated region like North America, it's fundamentally about endurance, predictability, calculation. It's not just about who strikes first or who, shouts the loudest.
Yeah, we started this exploration looking at the U.S. attempt to pressure Canada, maybe even bully them into submission.
Right, but it turned into this textbook lesson in interdependence. It revealed just how physically integrated the North American economy still is. You can't just wish that away.
And Canada chose that different path: negotiation, patience.
Exactly. Ensuring that when that critical USMCA review comes up in 2026, they'll still be holding the most valuable cards.
What cards are those again?
Stability, number one. Essential supply lines the U.S. absolutely cannot live without. And those deep investment ties that guarantee ongoing political leverage, they play the long game.
So what does this all mean for you listening to this, trying to navigate this, frankly, chaotic economy? You look at the profound instability in the U.S., the shutdowns, gold spiking, signaling massive fear, key allies hesitating. What does Canada's success turning American pressure into this form of quiet structural power What does that tell us about the future of global alliances?
Yeah, it's a big question. Our future alliance is going to be built on transactional trade friction and unpredictable policy swings.
Or on something else?
Or on economic trust, reliability, predictability. That seems to be the choice Oliver is implicitly highlighting.
Definitely something substantial for all of us to mull over as we watch this political landscape keep shifting. It feels like we're at a real turning point.
We could be. And that wraps up our full analysis of Michael Oliver's latest insights for today. For more in-depth exploration, more synthesis of the big forces shaping geopolitics and the economy, the kind of knowledge that really helps you connect the dots, make sure you are subscribed. It's fast, it's easy, and it keeps you critically informed. Subscribe to The Deep Dive today. Find it via Credvia. You won't regret it.